I'm U.S. Senator Ron Johnson from the great state of Wisconsin, and this is the elephant in the room.
Welcome to the Elephant in the Room. I'm your host, Cyrus Pearson.
I'm your co-host, Sophie Delkier.
Our senator today is so fun to say because he is Ron Johnson from the great state of Wisconsin. Love saying that. Sophie, your impressions of Senator Johnson today?
I mean, I love Senator Johnson. He's one of my favorites. I love what he stands for. I love what he talks about. He's very vocal, and he did not disappoint today.
You know what? He's a little more serious than our typical guest, and I think it's because he notices that there's a problem, and he really wants to fix it, and that's something he's running up against. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's true passion there, and there's a real drive to make a change, and that's unique and good.
Yeah, these are some of the most important people in the world, and we do have kitchen table conversations. But today you're going to hear from a man who is here to do a job. Let's hear from Senator Ron Johnson from the great state of Wisconsin. Senator, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Let's talk about something I'm sure it's on everybody's mind. Wisconsin, it's not a stereotype. It is the number one cheese-producing state in the entire union. Is that correct?
Yes, and I had a big hit here a couple weeks ago at a Senate lunch. I actually introduced fresh cheese curds to my colleagues. Most of them never had them.
With fresh cheese curds?
I don't think I have.
Never been refrigerated. So if you ever had it like a French fried cheese curd, it's just not the same thing. You really need them right off the vat before they ever get refrigerated.
Ooh.
They're warm to room temperature and they squeak. And they're just more flavorful.
I only discovered cheese curds in the last few years, and I love them. Sophie actually was French.
Yeah, so I have high standards, but I've had Wisconsin cheese. Very, very good. But so cheese curds, I mean, is that like cottage cheese? Excuse my ignorance.
Cottage cheese is very small curd.
Okay.
These are pretty good sized
curds.
And again, they're fresh and they squeak.
Wow.
And they're unique. I actually, when my business was bought by a British company, had the British gentleman, very prim and proper, talked about he lived in France and go down to the cheese shop and 200 different cheeses and said, well, John, have you ever had cheese curds? Didn't know what I was talking about. So we sent somebody out from the plant, got some fresh cheese curds, and this very prim and proper Englishman started giggling when he started eating the cheese curds. So it's a unique experience. You know, talk to any other Republican senator that was, Kennedy said I had a fetish with cheese curds. And maybe that's
that good, huh?
Proven true here on the program. But
well,
it's unique. I mean, they're great. They're great.
The Brits also have really good cheese, which I have just recently learned. So, I mean, that's high praise coming from an Englishman.
Okay. Well, let me just drive home. I love numbers. 90% of Wisconsin's milk supply is used to make more than 2 billion with a B pounds of cheese every year, and you have 1,290 licensed cheesemakers. I didn't realize it was actually that serious a thing.
Well, they're all over the place, and they're go from very large operations to an awful lot of small ones, and that's it is kind of sad that we're seeing consolidation of dairy farms, cheese factories, that type of thing. We saw that in the beer industry, and then eventually kind of came back and started having craft breweries, and of course then they'll start getting bought up by the big ones again. So it's always this tension of the big guys always try and take the little guys out, but somehow the little guys always survive. So
it's a good thing. Well, actually, speaking of beer, Senator, you have many accomplishments, but I will say one of your big ones is you can chug a beer in under 4 seconds. What is your favorite beer? And I'm going to go ahead and assume it's not Bud Light.
It's actually Miller Lite.
Okay, good.
So I like it. The clear, crisp taste of Miller Lite.
Right.
It's got a little bit of a bite to it.
Can you taste it in 3.9 seconds or whatever it is?
You don't have a whole lot of taste when you're chugging that quick. But,
and that's a heck of a skill.
I wouldn't call it, I guess it's a skill. But,
it is.
I won't go too much.
If I'm thirsty, I can drink fast.
Wow. I saw the video today for the first time. 12 seconds. Ended right after you did it, so I don't know what happened afterwards. But wow, that was impressive. I mean, I'm a lightweight. I'll just admit it. I cannot do a beer that fast.
Well, in Wisconsin, that does inure to your benefit electorally. So,
well, let's talk about people who can really down the beer and the cheese, because there is an absolutely huge event that I did not know about called the EAA Air Venture, which is actually taking place about 5 days from this taping. This will air a little later. The attendance there blew me away. I've got numbers from the website. 650,000 people come to this air show.
Wow.
10,000
I think
airplanes.
attendance has actually been higher than that in the past. But no, I drove by there heading to the Milwaukee airport today, and the campground's already filling up. It becomes the busiest airport in the world during EAA.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just to put it in comparison, the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas is the biggest show there. They get 180,000 people, and the population of our chairman, John Barrasso's state, is around 580,000. So you're getting 650 to 700,000 people there. That's absolutely
amazing.
insane.
I mean, I've seen the Concorde do kind of a tail stand. I mean, the pilots bring it in and they can. That's maybe a little bit exaggeration, but I mean, they flew that thing, or high speed flyby, 600 feet off the ground by a 747. You get military aircraft. One of my suppliers used to be Goodyear Chemical, and they brought in the blimp. So we got not only a ride on the blimp, but halfway through, the pilot just stands up and says, "Anybody want to fly this thing?" And so there's like a wooden bicycle pedal in the middle, or bicycle, wheel, and it just controls the altitude. And the way they land it, they just have a bunch of ropes hanging off this thing, and the pilot guides it low enough, and the ground crew grabs the ropes and drags it down. Very unsophisticated.
I've been to a few air shows. I know Sophie's been to at least one. I mean, just the infrastructure to be able to handle that many people is, how do you do it out there?
They pack them in. I mean, it's not exactly what you call pristine camping.
Sure.
It's very well. They got all the hookups, that type of thing, but you are stacked in there like cordwood.
Wow.
But so do people actually go out there and camp out for a few days in advance?
Yeah. I mean, they're already camping.
Oh, wow.
No, they take this seriously, and then a lot of them camp right by under the wing of their aircraft. I mean, I don't know how many aircraft fly in, but it's a lot. I mean, they.
Wow.
Well, you've mentioned a couple times already, and this is one of the things that I'm really curious about, because I think I've always been an aspiring businessman who's never actually gone into business, and I'm running out of years, I think.
Now, hold on. This is very true. I just want people to know. Cyrus comes to me about once a week with a new startup idea. Okay. Some are great. Some are ridiculous. Anyways,
failed businessman, I should have clarified. Can you tell us how you got into business? We'll work our way into the Senate here, but how did you get into business, and what did you do?
Well, first of all, so you don't get too discouraged, business is hard. And people don't recognize that. It's not easy to think of a product or service that somebody even wants to buy, much less produce it at a cost less than you can sell it for, so you can make a profit. So that's a very difficult thing to do. The heroes here in Washington, D.C. don't understand that. My own background, I'm an accountant, so I got a degree in accounting. Worked for Jostens as their ring sales accountant. Learned, by the way, in that process that you incentivize people in an unlimited fashion. You don't put constraints around it. So that's the way Jostens incentivized their salespeople, is they just open-ended commission. When they started making too much money, they brought somebody else and they expanded the territory.
Oh, wow.
So you just had to get higher and higher penetration. That worked out pretty well. So again, kind of learned the ropes of a successful business, the right type of incentive structure. Then I had an opportunity. My brother-in-law could start a business as a captive source supply for a plastic structure for lunch and meat packaging, and he wanted me to come over and be the accountant. I wanted to do everything, so we ran the equipment. I was our first sales guy. Eventually, we sold out to a British company. Then I bought the business back from the British company, and so I was involved in that same business for over 30 years.
So did you kind of fall into it, or?
Well, you can say that. I mean, we had a good opportunity through a family connection that could get us a captive customer, but then we expanded beyond that.
Okay, and specifically manufacturing. I mean, a 30-plus year career.
Right. Plastics.
What did you learn there? I like to get as much insight and inspiration for the listeners as possible. I mean, is there anything you learned about, were you managing, I assume?
Well, I did everything. Again, I literally ran the equipment, loaded trucks, kept the books, then went out and sold the product internationally, then sold the business to a British company, bought it back from the British company.
So,
I had the full range of experience of any business person you could have.
There's a lot going on with you here. What is something you could share with us that it takes to be successful in business?
Well, first of all, business is hard. Don't assume that it's going to be easy. You really need to understand the customers.
Okay.
That's just, and, of the three things that you sell on price, you sell on quality, and you sell on customer service. I would argue the most important of that is customer service.
Okay.
So you just have to have quality is just table stakes. I mean, you have to have acceptable quality and then some. It's you get the loyalty from the customer by going up above and beyond in terms of customer service, which allows you then to charge a higher price, which allows you to be successful. I mean, the last thing you want to do is compete price.
It sounds like a lot of what you're doing is kind of foundationally what I do a lot is problem solving. Is that a big part of it?
In manufacturing, it's a daily process, and so you learn the problem solving process, which they haven't learned here in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
They don't have a clue. But just to review it, the first step is admitting you have a problem.
Yeah.
The second step is properly defining the problem. Then, if possible, identify a root cause or root causes. And once you've done that, now you can start designing solutions. And then if there's any compromise from a standpoint of legislative solutions, that's when it occurs. Is once you've laid out all the solutions, because you all agree you have a problem, you all agree on what the problem is, you all agree on the root cause. Now you can compromise over what the proper solution would be.
Well, just hearing you talk about this, it's clear that this is an experience that you translate very easily into politics, right? Your customer is the American people. Your problem is, whatever it may be. I know that you're very vocal on China, big tech censorship. There's lots of big fights. Yeah, the deficit. So I can tell that you take this experience and that you translate it very effectively in your work here on the Hill.
Well, let me correct you. Effectively, no, you bring your problem-solving experience here and you hit a brick wall. No, I'm not the most uplifting character here.
Right, no.
Because I describe reality. People don't have a clue how grotesquely dysfunctional Washington, D.C. is. If I've got a mission as a U.S. Senator, it's to wean Americans, Wisconsinites, off the federal government. This place doesn't solve problems. It creates or exacerbates far more problems than it's ever solved. So quit looking at the federal government to solve your problem. It was not the vision of our founding fathers. Our founding fathers realized we needed some government, but it needed to be limited, particularly on a federal level. And most government should be close to the governed, where it's more effective, more efficient, more accountable. And we've turned that foundational premise on its head, and it's not working out very well.
Let's talk about some of the specifics of what is wrong and if it can be fixed and how it can be fixed.
So a big problem here is you have so very few bureaucrats in the agencies, staff of members of Congress, and members of Congress who have any experience in, which means very little knowledge of, and maybe even worse, sympathy for the private sector. It's not to say they're not smart people, they don't have good intentions, but they just don't have a clue what they're writing all these rules and regulations and laws trying to govern. They don't understand it. They don't have sympathy for it. And maybe even worse, they've never even been part of a functioning organization. But they view this as acceptable. I mean, this place drives me nuts.
Yeah. I mean, just hearing you all the time, it sounds like just an exercise in frustration for you to kind of be up here.
Well, it comes true, huh? I don't disguise it well.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of solutions that you want to share. And
to be clear, I don't think you should.
It's like it's going to take an act of Congress, to get something done around here.
Well, it starts with, again, admitting you have a problem, which means exposing the truth. And I didn't come up here to be an investigator. I came up here to, because we were mortgaging our kids' future. I knew Obamacare wouldn't work, and it didn't. But I became chairman of Homeland Security, which is the Senate Oversight Committee. Most people don't realize that. It used to be the Senate Governmental Affairs Committee, and then they tacked on Homeland Security. So we are the Senate Oversight Committee, like House Oversight. And I became chairman right as the story of Hillary Clinton's email scandal broke. And that actually happened. Federal records is in our legislative jurisdiction as well. So that's something I couldn't turn a blind eye towards. So I started investigating that. You see the corruption of Comey exonerating her. That same cast of characters then were involved in the corrupt and fraudulent Russian collusion investigation and just continued. And so, my eyes have been opened wide in terms of dysfunction and corruption of this place.
I wanted to ask you this because you are just basically lambasted in the media that at least I have access to. And the things you've said, you can go a few years beyond that in the future, and you look back and you've been right on
everything.
Much of it.
Yeah,
I'm hedging my bets and saying
no. Listen, we're all human and we make some mistakes on a number every now and again, but everything they accuse me of being conspiracy theorist about, I was literally investigating true conspiracies, and I challenge people. Okay, well, if there's something you think I said was not true, what is it? Well, I can't tell you right off the top of my head. Well, call me later. And I challenge the press all the time. In COVID, tell me one thing I said about COVID that wasn't true, including gargling. Okay, I mean, I was lambasted, ridiculed for a couple of weeks. Had we used nasal sprays, had we used gargling,
mouthwash,
had we used early treatment with things like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, we wouldn't have had a problem. By the way, this has been way overblown too. You take a look at the infection fatality rate of COVID right now. If you're under 70, it's 0.05. Standard flu season is about 0.1. So it's half of a flu season. We freaked out. We spent trillions of dollars. We gave up all kinds of freedom.
Well, and I think I just saw that they just actually started to finally admit that, a lot of the COVID deaths when it first happened in 2020, they had recorded as died from COVID, whereas in reality it was really with COVID.
Oh, they're not admitting it. It's being exposed.
Yeah, right.
People are going to autopsy records and they're just proving what we all knew, anybody paying attention knew at the time. But no, I mean, I call them the COVID cartel, primarily the Biden administration, big pharma, the federal agencies, media and big tech social media giants. That's the COVID cartel. They sabotage early treatment. They push the vaccines. They denied vaccine injuries. They'll never admit they're wrong. They can't afford to be proven wrong because the body count's too high. And the problem is they've got the power to make it almost impossible to prove them wrong. And so they're just moving on. Because, don't look behind the curtains there. So no, they will never admit they're wrong.
So you're crucified as soon as these things happen. Time goes by, you're validated, quote unquote, but when do you get redemption and when do people criticizing you constantly lose their credibility? I hate to use this word again, but again, it has to be frustrating for you.
Oh, it is. Again, you have to look at what we as Republicans, and now broaden it, what we as Republicans are up against. We are up against leftists, radical leftists that have infiltrated virtually every institution of this country, starting with our university system. And the key colleges they control, College of Journalism, we don't have journalists anymore. We basically have advocates for the left. Education. I wish we had teachers teaching our children values and morals and reading arithmetic, okay? But no, they're indoctrinating our children. They're pushing transgenderism on them. Law. Cranking out a bunch of lawyers that become activist judges, and now from COVID we found out that we're also graduating an awful lot of woke doctors that actually believe and have faith in people like Anthony Fauci, and they shouldn't.
Are these all things that you were privy to before you came up here, or can you tell about how coming up here has changed your thoughts, if at all?
No, again, I came here because we were mortgaging our kids' future. I knew Obamacare was going to be a failed experiment. Never intended to investigate these things, so once you start investigating, once your eyes start opening, you can't close them. So that's, my eyes have been opened.
And your motivation, it's not up here. You didn't come up here to become rich.
No, when I first ran in 2010, I made two promises. I said, I'll always tell you the truth. I'll never vote, and by extension, I will not conduct myself with re-election in mind. I think I've honored those promises to a T. So now, it is a different motivating factor. I think a lot of people coming up here, their primary motivating factor is to get reelected. I'd just soon go home. No, I mean, I'm being serious. I was not going to run for a third term. Not the only. I mean, I couldn't turn my back on this country. I mean, we are heading down the wrong path, but nobody else is advocating for the vaccine injured.
What are your constituents telling you when you talk to them?
Well, it depends on whether you're talking to Democrat constituents or Republican. Listen, I've got a pretty loyal following of people that followed me during COVID and appreciated the fact that I've advocated for early treatment, and I defended the doctors who did treat early and did save people's lives. So I've got a very loyal following from that standpoint. Obviously, Republicans appreciate the fact that I was the first one together with Chuck Grassley that really investigated Hunter Biden, investigated the corruption within the FBI, Department of Justice, intelligence agencies. Democrats hate my guts.
Well, you've mentioned COVID a lot, and let's go to the root of that, and that's Communist China. I know that you're very vocal on that, and you're very vocal on the threat of Communist China and kind of their influence and their infiltration of our economy and the structure that we have here in the United States. What, if you could explain to our listeners, what kind of road are we on? And if we continue down this road, what does this look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
So Ronald Reagan was right when he said you achieve peace through strength. I think too many people misinterpret that as military strength.
Okay.
You need to be strong militarily so nobody even thinks of attacking you. So I would prefer thinking of our military defensively. I want to support a strong military defense. Mm-hmm. Less an offense masquerading as a defense. But it starts with being strong economically, being strong morally. I would much rather see America as that shining beacon because people appreciate our values. They understand. I always talk about the one essential ingredient, which is called freedom. Mm-hmm. It's freedom that has allowed us as Americans to dream and aspire and build and create this marvel we call America. So it starts with recognizing what made this country great, freedom, defending that freedom. And unfortunately, far too many of our fellow citizens are willingly giving their freedom away for a false sense of security. So in terms of China specifically, they sense weakness, particularly under Biden. I mean, everything this administration has done is weaken this country. Mm-hmm. Open borders, 40-year high inflation, the war on fossil fuel, driving gasoline prices up, the embarrassing and dangerous surrender in Afghanistan, everything. Mm-hmm. Plus, how many times did he say in his inauguration? I think 8 times. His number one goal is to unify and heal this nation. He's done the exact opposite, as did Obama. Listen, I didn't vote for Obama. I knew I was going to disagree with him, but I thought, okay, if we elect our first black president, maybe we can complete or significantly improve the healing of our racial divide. Mm-hmm. Obama exacerbated it, as has Biden. And right now, you asked me a couple of years ago what's the greatest threat facing this nation, I would have said our debt and deficit. So I came here. Right now, I'd say it's the division in this country. And people need to understand we're not a naturally divided country. America is a great country because we are, by and large, good people. I don't care what side of the political spectrum, we care about each other. We're good people. We care about people globally. We're good people. Mm-hmm. We're not naturally divided. There are elements in this country that are purposefully dividing us. That's what identity politics is all about. Tell this group that Republicans hate them, so they hate Republicans. That's what's going on here. We don't hate people.
I see that a lot with kind of the book issue right now. Conservatives are sounding the alarm, and not just conservatives, I should say, just concerned parents are kind of sounding the alarm of maybe, graphically inappropriate books that are being exposed to their children and about conversations that they're not maybe ready to have with their children or that those children are too young to kind of experience. And I've seen a lot from the left, even this morning, Obama tweeted this big, stop conservatives from banning books. And it kind of paints a picture of a dangerous rhetoric that conservatives have when the reality is concerned parents, and parental freedom to parent our children without other people doing that work for us. Do you think that's accurate? I mean, what is that an important issue to you?
There's a concerted effort on the part of the left to sexualize our children. That's just undeniable. Mm-hmm. And they're pushing it further and further down. This transgenderism, where did this thing come from? We're literally talking about mutilation of children. They can't get a tattoo, but we're allowing, and I can't even believe doctors and nurses would even do this to a child, and they're mutilating them. Right now you have the movie Sound of Freedom. It's doing far better than anybody thought, and so it's being attacked. Sex trafficking is real. We've lost track of 85,000 unaccompanied children. And the Biden administration, they just shrug. I held hearings as chairman of Homeland Security. They were selling children for $81. to create a family unit to exploit our asylum laws. How do you think young women pay off their $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 human trafficking fee? Well, they get pushed into the sex trade. So these things are real, and the left-wing media is just savaging. They're just vilifying the sound of freedom. It wasn't 100% accurate. Well, it's a movie. It's fictionalized, but it's making an important point.
Right.
But no, I think what drives me nuts about Washington, D.C. is we don't talk about these things. I mean, certainly as Democrat chairman, they're not holding hearings on these things. Not on the open border, not on the sex trafficking, not on the drug trafficking. It's like, say, I should have warned you guys. I know this is supposed to be a light interview. I'm not a very uplifting person. There are serious issues facing this nation, and we need more of our fellow citizens to open up their eyes and recognize we are on the wrong path. I try and remind people that Venezuelans voted themselves into poverty. Just took a couple decades.
Yeah.
They're the ones that voted for Hugo Chavez.
Right.
And it went downhill ever since. Americans voted for Joe Biden.
And I think people kind of don't see that that's something that could happen in the United States. I'm French. I grew up in France. There's a lot of civil unrest in France right now. And, I think it surprises people. And, essentially, France looks very different now than it used to. And there's a lot of reasons why. But it just goes to show that, you go down a road of certain policies in place, and then 5-10 years later, you realize the country you live in looks nothing like how it used to.
I'm a huge proponent of legal immigration. We've had wave and wave of immigrants coming, the poor, the tired, the huddled masses, and they made this country great. I mean, they came here to access freedom and opportunity, and they worked their tail off, and they built this nation, okay?
Right.
But it's got to be a legal process. And if you allow uncontrolled immigration, that's, of course, what happened with the Syrian war, and all of a sudden a flood of illegal immigrants could not be assimilated, totally different culture, remain separate. That's explosive to a society, and it's hard to recover from. And the same thing could be happening here in the United States, and we're not controlling it. The gangs coming in, the drug, the human trafficking. I mean, all the problems with the illegal trafficking, even the ones that you would welcome in a legal system, they're coming through an illegal system, and they don't have a valid asylum claim. They might get work permits for a couple of years until their final adjudication hearing occurs. Then they won't show up for that. Now they're living in the shadows. That's where they can be exploited. So the illegal immigration system doesn't benefit anybody long term. We need a legal immigration system, and it has to be calibrated to let the right number of people in so they can be properly assimilated, so that they have jobs without reducing American opportunities and American wages. Again, it's a difficult thing to manage, but it has to be managed, and right now it's completely out of control.
Senator, we wouldn't ask you to be anybody other than yourself, so we do appreciate you bringing that here today. One of the beauties of podcasts is you can cover a lot of topics and get that information across. So let me just throw out a bunch here, and you give me a solution or just your thoughts on that. Protecting our country against cyber attacks.
Really tough.
These are tough questions.
No, the guys on offense are always ahead of you. I think it's best done through the private sector. I don't think government can keep up. They can't compensate people. They're just not nimble enough. I mean, I've always suggested like an ISO certification process. I mean, you have that in manufacturing, and so you have 6-month surveillance process. So you have combine that with an insurance model. So the insurance companies come in there and, well, you want to buy cyber insurance? Well, you have to have your standards pretty high. So many of the hacks, if you look at these, are occurring with people that aren't using dual authentication, or they never reset their administration passcode beyond 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
So 90-some% of these attacks, just simple cyber hygiene could protect that. So if you had a certification process combined with an insurance process, I think it has a far better chance of providing the kind of cyber security that might actually work, as opposed to government regulation will never do it.
You've already touched on this some, but securing the border.
Well, we as Chairman of Homeland Security, I worked with Kirsten Sinema. We developed something working with DHS called Operation Safe Return. She signed it. Gary Peters never would. And we had some other Republican senators on that. DHS took that back to the Department, that morphed into return to Mexico. It was a rapid adjudication of an asylum claim and safely returned home. You know, return to Mexico is a slightly different program like that, but it worked. I mean, you provide consequences for coming to this country illegally. You have to be committed to it. And so we pretty well stopped the flow of unaccompanied children, family units exploiting our laws. Even single adults were down until the Democrat presidential primaries, when all the Democrat presidential candidates were saying, oh, we're going to give people free health care. All of a sudden you had more single adults coming in, and then Biden took office, and it's just exploded tragically.
And to be clear, I mean, you know, I hear conservatives saying this, and then people on the left say, oh, well, it's just the typical conservative who, you know, is anti-immigration. And to be clear, I mean, it is a humanitarian crisis. I mean, it's dangerous for everybody, like you touched on previously. And I've seen some pretty horrible stories of, you know, the incentives are so high that people are trying to jump the fence, and you have 10-year-old girls jumping over, you know, abused, sexually assaulted, and then they break their neck jumping over the fence.
Well, they have the taunting trees, you know, where the abuse is horrible. There's nothing humane about our system. But bottom line, you have to fix our asylum law. You can't have such a low hurdle of credible fear. I'm afraid to go back. Well, come on in then. That doesn't work.
Destroying Islamic terrorism. I mean, is that something we're not even hearing that much about anymore?
Well, the threat has certainly been reduced because there has been a fair amount of destruction to Al-Qaeda, to ISIS. I sure want America to be the peacemaker around the world. I don't want America to be, I don't want us to be the policemen of the world. I don't want us to be the war makers around the world. I don't want us looking at everybody in some of these countries that are adversarial to us as just all irredeemably evil. You know, we just had the PGA hearing last week with Blumenthal. I said we shouldn't even be involved in it, right? But I'm a ranking member. I was part of the hearing. And we had Jimmy Dunn, who's the board member who reached out to the Saudis. He lost 40% of his colleagues in the World Trade Center terrorist attack. So he's part of the 9/11 families, okay?
Right.
So he reached out to the Saudis because he's trying to save Gulf. One of his more powerful statements, he said, Senator, I don't want the 18 million Saudis who are under the age of 32 who had no involvement in 9/11 at all to think Americans hate them. I really think we have to completely rethink how we approach foreign policy, how we approach defense funding, all the bases we have all over the world. I think we have to make a fundamental break with what America has been in the past and what we want to be like in the future. And that's probably a pretty radical thing for a Republican to say, because that's, I'm an outlier.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear you bring up PGA. I actually want to talk about this. There's been a lot of talk about it. There's been a lot of skepticism. And just for listeners who may not know what this is and what's going on, PGA is an American golf company and LIV is a Saudi Arabian golf company. And I'll kind of tie this back into China, and this is maybe more of my personal beliefs, but people are kind of up in arms about a merger and acquisition between a Saudi Arabian company. I have to say, though, under the Biden administration, we've offshored a lot of our oil, and we buy oil from Saudi Arabia. And we have communist China, so in bed with many companies here, BlackRock as an example. So why is this acquisition or this merger dangerous? Why are people upset about that? I see it as a little hypocritical in a way. I don't know if I'm off base. Could you speak to that?
Well, people are upset because of political rhetoric and demagoguery. The reality situation is financial ties between nations is a stabilizing factor. It's really not a problem that China owns over $1 trillion worth of debt. It's that anybody owns $1 trillion worth of debt. The fact that China owns it is somewhat stabilizing. Would you destroy the financial institutions of a country that owes $1 trillion?
Right.
So that's stabilizing. Who filled up the public investment fund of Saudi Arabia? We did. We bought their oil. So now they got $600 or $700 billion of money to invest. Do we expect them to burn it? So would you rather, I'm asking Americans now, would you rather have the Saudis reinvest that $600 to $700 billion in China or North Korea or Iran or in America? So Saudi Arabia has hundreds of billions of dollars investment here in America. Are we going to ask all countries to divest of Saudi investments, tank our own stock market? Is Congress going to be the entity that's going to look at all these hundreds, if not thousands of companies that Saudi Arabia has invested in and say, okay, you are an iconic American brand. You are going to be called upon to hold Saudi Arabia accountable for the Khashoggi murder. Mm-hmm. That's absurd, but that's what's happening right now.
Okay.
So I guess what I tried to bring to the hearing was some rational basis for it. And again, if you're concerned about Saudi Arabia becoming influential in golf, blow up the deal between the PGA Tour and Saudi Arabia, and then Saudi Arabia will spend billions of dollars, and they will take over golf, and they will destroy the game. Mm-hmm. That's what will happen. I mean, the PGA actually, I think, negotiated a pretty darn good tentative framework. Pretty well accomplished what needs to be accomplished, recognizing the reality that the Saudis are going to be involved in golf. Let them have a seat at the table, but let the PGA Tour be in control of it. We can reunify the game. We can have the best players competing against each other, which is what brings the money into the game, the market-based money into the game. Mm-hmm. It's just unfair competition. But no, I mean, I looked at that entire issue, and trust me, once again, I realize I'm the counter-narrative to the majority of the narrative out there. Saudi Arabia bad.
Right.
Keep them out.
No, I'm glad to hear you explain that. I just went to the Live golf tournament here in Virginia a few weekends ago, and it was really fun. And their whole thing is, if they end up going through with the merger, it'll be great for PGA as well. But their whole thing is golf but louder. And so they had some good music, and it was a good time. It was fun.
Yeah, but now you split some of the best players of the game. They're not competing each other in the same tournaments, and I do like the purity of the competition.
Senator, okay? I was there for the beer, not the golf, to be honest with you.
Trust me, you're talking to somebody from Wisconsin. Everything we do in Wisconsin revolves around drinking beer in some way, shape, or form.
There you go.
Let's talk about some of the accomplishments that you've been involved in. Can you tell us about the Joseph Project, what that is?
Sure. Well, when I first became senator, coming from the manufacturing background, we had not been able to hire enough people in manufacturing for years, okay? Just don't have enough workers. So then you go become a senator, you see these pockets of unemployment in places like Milwaukee, places in Madison, there's some of the other cities. Go, how can this be? So how can you make the connections between all the opportunities? I mean, good career type of jobs in manufacturing and these people that, want opportunity. And we ran into a pastor at the Greater Praise Church of God in Christ. His name was Pastor Jerome Smith. And Sheboygan had an economic development committee. They had about 4,000 jobs open, and we made the connection. And so what the Joseph Project is literally it's 4 days of instruction of people that qualify. They've made the commitment to succeed. A lot of formerly incarcerated, drug, alcohol abusers. I mean, people that are rock bottom, but they want to turn their lives around. And we just instilled them in the importance of committing yourself to success, oftentimes multiple times a day, and having the right attitude. Wanting to learn, wanting to contribute, wanting to work hard, recognizing that if you do that, you'll benefit the company, you'll benefit yourself, your family, and people even in the future who can also take advantage of the same opportunity. So the Joseph Project, we're up to, well into 130, 140 different classes of that. Wow. We've literally transformed hundreds of lives. I wish I could say tens of thousands, but I'll take hundreds. And people literally whose lives have been transformed. They've bought cars for the first time. The ones that really are heart warming are my daughter says she's proud of me. Aww. My mom's proud of me.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
It's very cool.
Another thing you fought to help Wisconsin families bring children they adopted from war-torn Congo home.
Yeah, that's, a bunch of us did that, honestly. A lot of senators, Democrat and Republican, you had the issue of, the Congo orphanages, and you had Americans that were adopting them, and then they couldn't get their, they'd already adopted the children, couldn't get them out of the Congo. So we worked with the embassy, the ambassador of Congo, and a bunch of senators did that. I mean, one pretty little Grace, and she's got a biracial family, and she's doing great. She's going to go on to I think Miss Junior Wisconsin, and she's going to compete nationally, and just kind of cool stories.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think I got that right, but it's one of those contests, but it's really a cool thing.
And let's talk about at least one more thing here. You're pushing for right to try legislation. Can you let our listeners know what that is and what the problem is and what you think we should do?
Well, I always supported it, and Goldwater Institute had a state-by-state strategy of first passing by the state-by-state, right to try a drug that maybe isn't fully FDA approved. Give patients the freedom to take that risk. And a couple weeks after I had met with Goldwater, I had a young woman, Trickett Wendler, mother of 3, with ALS. And I told her I supported right to try, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. And that was the moment I said, okay, I got to champion this bill. So I did. And it took us a couple of years. It took the FDA user fee that everybody thought was a must-pass piece of legislation would have no resistance, and I objected to it. So I got the attention of Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray, who were the chairman and ranking member of Health Committee, and we negotiated with the big pharma companies as well. They never supported it. They just said they wanted to sabotage it, and then once we passed in the Senate unanimously, then they sabotaged it in the House until Trump forced the House to pass the Senate version, which was the only one that was going to pass. So it's saved lives.
Wow.
It has saved lives. It saved lives during COVID. There was a drug called Aviptidil that was literally saving people that were writing their last will and testaments, healed their lungs. Wasn't widely known, so didn't save enough people. But other doctors contact me that they've used right to try on different trials. And
right to try is for terminally ill?
Terminally ill, yeah. I'd like to expand it, but it's also an action forcing. It's forced the FDA to expand its expanded access program. It's opened them up. Unfortunately, now we need a companion bill, right to treat, so that doctors have, this should not be necessary. Doctors have absolute right to use, any approved drug off label as they best see fit, but that was denied them during COVID.
Wow. I've told Cyrus about a study that I saw, which I'm, very passionate about and interested in, which is my turkey tail mushroom supplement. And I
bought some for the dog.
It's good. I mean, there have been stories of, people who have stage 4 breast cancer. And I think turkey tail mushroom, this is just a mushroom that grows on trees, on rotting wood in a forest. And, there's a woman who was stage 4 breast cancer and in her 80s, too old for chemotherapy, and she's still kicking. So I told Cyrus about it, and I'm just laughing because maybe that's, where the trial was under.
What unfortunately Big Pharma has completely captured medicine. They've captured our medical schools. They've captured our federal health agencies. There's no advocates for generic drugs. I mean, that's one of the reasons they had to sabotage the use of ivermectin, which works. These things work. I mean, they work. I was able to refer enough patients to doctors who used it. I'd follow up on them, sometimes miraculous, rapid recovery from these things. But it was all denied. And so the result is nobody knows what is true. If you have a chance, your listeners, listen to President Eisenhower's farewell address. It's 15 minutes long. He not only predicted the danger of the military-industrial complex, he predicted the danger of federal government funding research and how we could be ruled by an elite scientific and technocracy, okay? And that could basically take over public policy. That's happened. The other thing he ruled about was, don't plunder a mortgage on our children's future. He was right about that. And the other thing he talked about was we can't allow global society to descend in what he called a dreadful state of fear and hate. So the 4 things he warned us about are pretty well coming true.
Yeah.
Very, very prescient man.
This sounds like a good, maybe potential bonus episode.
Oh, yeah. Senator, we are going to have to wrap up. I think that was a good note to end on. But, we give you this platform. Anything you want to say, anything you want to let the listeners know before we wrap up.
Well, I apologize for not making this as lighthearted as you maybe wanted to have.
It was great.
I'm here for a serious reason, okay?
Yes.
And what drives me crazy is we're not serious in this place. So much is just politics, and we need to set up federal health agencies to explore these different molecules that are widely available, that are cheap, that are generic, that can do amazing things. There's a doctor who the FDA tried to destroy. He's still practicing in Texas, curing cancers. The FDA patented his research.
Wow.
But they spent $66 million trying to destroy him, okay? Because it's all cheap, generic stuff.
Right.
So we need a federal health agency that actually looks at the science, not the studies presented to them by Big Pharma, doctored by, corrupted by Big Pharma. Same thing with Big Ag. I mean, again, we have all these, fill-in-the-blank industrial complexes now. They're all supplicants of the federal government. They've all captured the agencies. We need to be aware of that. And Congress ought to be opening its eyes. We ought to be holding hearings. We ought to be having people testify. But we're not. We're caught up in this charade. We're going to argue over, are we going to get 20 amendments that are all going to fail? And we'll draw out the process of the NDAA just to get some votes on, again, amendments that are guaranteed. They're only allowed because they will fail. We got to get serious about these things. But it starts with hearings. It starts with uncovering and exposing the truth. And I said freedom is the one essential ingredient. The highest value is truth. And it's getting very difficult to discern the truth nowadays. It's getting very difficult.
Well, we appreciate.
And on that high note.
Yeah. No. I mean, I for one was very excited for this episode specifically for this reason, and I personally appreciate the good fight that you're doing here.
Actually did not disappoint. Senator, thank you for being today's The Elephant in the Room.
Thanks for tolerating me.
When are we releasing a new episode? Well, you don't really need to worry yourself if you hit that subscribe button. It'll just pop up on your platform. P.S. The answer is every 2 weeks. The Elephant in the Room is brought to you under the direction of U.S. Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming. Arjun Modi heads it all up, Carly Rapp does it all, and Elena Seiler is our right-hand woman. Until next time, this is The Elephant in the Room.